This is an interview of Chris Cozad conducted on November 25th at about 1:30 p.m. at her auto care shop. So, Chris, can you tell me a little bit about maybe your ethnic background? Where you're from?
Well, I'm born and raised in Ohio. I grew up in Geneva, Ohio, which is northeastern Ohio. So I'm, a lifelong Buckeye, I guess. I did live in West Virginia for a couple of years, but I've been in Columbus 27 years, something like that. So I've been in Central Ohio a long time.
Great.
Heritage, I don't know. German primarily, but
a lot of Ohioans are.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about your parents or any siblings you have?
Sure. I'm an only child. My parents were both disabled. My dad was in a wheelchair, had polio when he was 7.
Oh my gosh.
And my mother is blind since birth.
Wow, what was that like?
Well, you know what? They were just my parents,
Yeah.
so it really didn't have much of an impact on me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I never got away with anything because of it, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But what it did teach me is some awareness about, obviously, number one, people with disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
but also just about oppression and privilege.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that.
So,
I
grew up in a small town, so it was pretty typical.
Yeah. Were they able to work?
Oh yeah, my dad's been dead for about 10 years now, but he was a police dispatcher.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm. And my mom's still alive. She primarily did child care.
Mm-hmm.
Lots and lots of in-home child care. My parents were foster parents when I was younger. Mostly infants, but they had 50-some, not at once, one at a time.
That's impressive.
But 50-some foster kids that they helped to raise for a while. And then my mom also is a massage therapist.
Wow, so she's a busy lady.
Yeah. And even now is a busy lady.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Good for her. Can you tell me maybe a little bit about your cultural life growing up, like maybe some of your favorite books, radio?
Oh gosh,
movies,
I was a pretty typical kid. I was a pretty typical kid. I was a band kid. I played the trumpet and the French horn, so I was very involved in the band and all of those things that kind of go along with band stuff. Obviously now I'm working in a non-traditional job. I've always liked to work with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
Did a lot of woodworking and that kind of stuff. Started into auto mechanics when I was in college.
Wow.
Used to be a biology teacher, have a degree in biology.
Mm-hmm. How did you make that transition?
Well, no, there's a whole different story. Doesn't have anything to do with lesbian culture. But
we want to know all about your life.
Yeah, I had an old car when I was in college, no money,
Mm-hmm.
and a friend who was a mechanic. And so that's how I sort of got started doing it primarily as a hobby. How it turned into a business really was just kind of a fluke because I was unemployed at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And my friends kept calling me and wanted me to help them, fix their car or they need brakes. And then it was their friends, and then there was their friends' mothers, and it just kind of grew from there.
Great.
And here I am, 27 years later, still doing it. So.
Can you tell me about your earliest memory?
Well, it's going to be a funny one because I know exactly what it is.
Oh.
And I don't know why I remember it, but I remember my great-grandmother's funeral.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
How old were you?
I was 2.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So you did go to college, you said.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you study?
Hiram College, which is in the northeastern Ohio as well. It's near Kent.
Did you like it there?
I did.
Who were your heroes at that age? Who did you look up to? Anybody special?
My heroes, man, these are tough questions. I think, I thought, I want to know about lesbian community in Columbus in the 70s.
We'll get there.
Yeah. I don't know. I had a couple of favorite teachers. I don't think I know the answer to that.
Was there anyone at that point, GLBT, that you could look to, or?
No, I came out when I was in college.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my earliest memories were was reading Lesbian Women by Del Mar and Phyllis Lyons. I guess that would be probably one of those early influences on my life, certainly. But I was also very much a feminist. Mm-hmm. So I was just as likely to, be reading Gloria Steinem or, somebody else. I would say that is the thing for me, and kind of generically, that having the opportunity to kind of grow up and come out in the 70s and that sort of peak wave of feminism
that's very interesting.
Was probably what saved my life.
Wow. Now, do you identify as lesbian?
I do.
Mm-hmm. When did you first realize?
I was a sophomore in college. I was 19.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Did you tell anyone at first?
No, not really. No, it was pretty much. I mean, I had a girlfriend, so obviously she knew.
She knew.
And we would sneak off to Kent to go to the gay bars in Kent or go to Akron. We didn't tell any of our friends. I didn't come out to my family until I was in my 20s.
So how did you meet her and recognize that you would both be interested in a relationship?
We played basketball together in
college. Great. Now, when you did come out, mm-hmm. Did you tell your parents first, or what was that like?
I didn't tell my parents first. Who did I? I don't even know. It was a long time ago, and I pretty much just kind of blew the doors off the closet. I didn't have a big struggle with it. I lived in West Virginia, and that's really. When I graduated from college, I took a teaching job in Wheeling, West Virginia. Mm-hmm. And it was really there that I came out, not personally, but I came out into a community. And I really started to get involved with, I knew other gay people besides my girlfriend or strangers that I talked to at the bar. I actually started to make a circle of friends and have community. And so that was a great thing for me personally, just because it was so refreshing to, just to be out and not, it wasn't that I wasn't out. Mm-hmm. I don't know, it was just kind of weird, but it was a very definite kind of a relief thing. I was like, oh yeah. When I told my parents, I was actually already involved in activism at that point. Of course, it didn't take me long. Mm-hmm. And I actually did an interview with the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And I knew my dad read the Plain Dealer. And so I thought I'd better tell him before I saw it in the paper. And I told my parents, and it's kind of a funny story actually, because I told my parents, and their attitude was basically, yeah, we knew that. and so it was really kind of a non-issue.
Yeah, that's good.
So many years later, probably 6 or 7 years ago, my mom was down for a visit. It was after my dad had died, and she was on a panel at a conference that was doing a panel on gay and lesbian issues and senior citizens. And so she was like the mom, Mm-hmm. So there were some senior citizen gay and lesbian folks on the panel, and then there were some parents, and my mom was one of the parents. And so she told my coming out story to this room full of people. So it was really the first time I'd ever kind of heard her perspective on the story.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of cool. But it was essentially the same thing. It was like, well, we knew that, and it was, But apparently my father had a moment of whatever. And my mother just said, now, look, we are not going to have this. This is not going to ruin this family. We love our daughter, and that's the end of it, and you need to get over yourself.
Good for her.
And he did. And, and I had a great relationship with my dad.
Did you find any resistance in that early period of coming out from anyone besides your father? So, was the community fairly accepting?
On a personal level, no. Because I never really spent a lot of time with anybody who would actually care. But I certainly saw other people go through that, and certainly experienced, discrimination and harassment and those kinds of things, but mostly from strangers or neighbors rather than, I felt very fortunate. And even my extended family, my mom has a big family, lots of cousins, and it was really, as far as I know, pretty much a non-issue with them as well. I certainly never had any confrontation with them about it or anything. So I was fortunate in that regard.
And you are open about your sexuality now, correct? Do you still find resistance from strangers as much, more, not as much?
Well, I have a certain amount of bias that I bring to that question that you should probably be aware of, and that's because I'm on the board of BRAVO, which is the Buckeye Region Anti-Violence Organization, and that's what we do, is we deal with issues of violence and discrimination against LGBT people. So I have a fair amount of information about that topic, and I have, I read the stories and the statistics, and I know what. So, yeah, it is still definitely a problem. It has not gone away, nor is it likely to anytime soon. There's an incredible amount of homophobia in the world still, and I think it's getting better, but it certainly isn't gone by any stretch of the imagination. And I've made choices in my life that have given me, I don't have a lot, I'm completely out. I can't think of any place in my life where I'm not out. Work, home, family, so I don't really have to deal with it so much, and I have also surrounded myself with friends and community that are supportive. So, but do I still hear stories of people getting harassed on the street? Absolutely.
I don't know if you know any off the top of your head, but do you know any of the statistics about like how often this really does occur in our area?
Again, we're going down a tangent, but we have been documenting statistics in Columbus and Central Ohio for 13 years. Last year, and I don't know that I can give you the exact number, but I'm going to say it was 202, might have been 203. But we have been right around 200 incidents a year for the past 8 years. Plus or minus 5%. Kind of fluctuates a little bit, but that's a pretty consistent. And those really run the whole range from simple harassment, hey dyke walking down the street, to all the way, arson, assault, rape, and murder. So it really kind of does run the full range. But,
And that's only the people that are coming forward about it, right?
Right.
Well, we've talked a lot about butch femme roles in class. So can you tell me about how, like, over time they've sort of evolved?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I can talk about that a fair amount because I actually do workshop presentations about it.
Great.
I'm sure I'm not going to tell you anything you haven't already talked about in class, but one of the things I think is interesting is that it is an evolution. Certainly in the 50s it was very rigid. You were butch or you were femme. And there was it was very much about who you were with. Like, you were, butches were with femmes and vice versa. There was kai-kai, which is that kind of people who weren't sure, but that was very, in the lesbian community, it was very, not frowned upon, I guess would be a better word. It was like, well, you're kai-kai, that's just because you haven't figured it out yet. It's kind of like, well, you're going to be what you're femme eventually. You have to. And it was really rigid. It was, if you ultimately decided that you were butch, that meant very specific things about how you dressed, how you interacted with people, and so it was pretty rigid, and it was pretty much tied to traditional male and female gender roles. And then in the 70s, which is really when I came out, it was interesting because at that I came out of the early 70s, and as we moved through the 70s, that very much became this sort of androgynous period. And it was the blue jeans, flannel shirts, kind of androgynous look. And there was definitely, particularly in the lesbian feminist community, there was a certain, that butch femme, that's bad, that's women trying to act like men. And so there was a very negative kind of connotation for a while. And then we kind of moved into the 80s. And in the 80s, there was kind of a resurgence of butch femme, but it was very much about the erotic and the play. And it was very much almost like theater. It was erotic theater, essentially. And it was very much about who you were attracted to. And then, we continue to see that kind of evolve into the 90s, resurgence of what might have been the more traditional butch femme, not so much the erotic play, but kind of back looking more at the sort of gender stereotypes. And then there's the transgender phenomenon, which really blurred things quite a bit. And, the transgender movement consciously tried to deconstruct gender.
Interesting.
And again, I have a feminist perspective that says they have deconstructed gender almost to the point where it has no meaning anymore. Huh. And gender and sex are not the same thing, and I'm sure you know that. And I really think you can't change your gender. You can change your gender expression. You can change your sex, but your gender is much more about how you were raised. And as women are raised with those very traditional gender roles. These are the things this is how women dress, this is how women act, this is how women think, this is, the kind of jobs that women pursue. And these over here are the same kinds of things that are traditionally male, and that those somehow fluid. Well, society isn't fluid, I don't think, when it comes to gender roles. That's still dominant culture. Very much so. And so I've been crossing gender norms my entire life. I played sports before Title IX. I have worked in non-traditional jobs my entire life. I played with guns and trucks when I was a kid. I was not so much into the dolls. And yet I very much identify as woman, female, lesbian, and butch. Because for me, and this is where I felt so privileged about growing up and coming out in that peak wave of the feminist movement, I very much internalized that I could be a woman, I could be a dyke, I could be butch, I could do anything I want, and it didn't make me not a woman, and that the problem was the system. And that I could do those things, and it was the system that was trying to tell me that I couldn't that was the problem. And as we moved in this whole butch femme thing into the 90s and into the early part of the 21st century, the transgender movement has, in many ways, I think, set back that message. Because now, again, people are changing their identity, in some cases their body, and how they express, but they're not challenging the underlying system and the role that says a woman can be a mechanic, and a woman can be the president, and a woman can be, whatever, and that the problem, the society that says we can't is the problem.
Right.
And so, I think from a feminist perspective that's very unfortunate.
I would agree with you.
And and what it has done in particular, and as a butch, what it has made butch women invisible. I can't tell you how many times people look at me and assume I'm trans.
Really?
Just because I'm butch, and it's like, no, not so much.
Wow.
And I find that frustrating because it's definitely perceived in the GLBT community as a continuum, and somehow butch is on the far end of the continuum. And then the next step is, well, gee, don't you want to transition? And it's like, no, I don't want to be male. I'm not male. It's not anything about that. Mm-hmm. It's about, I get to do whatever I want. I get to wear the kind of clothes that are comfortable for me. I get to do the kind of work I love. And it doesn't make me not a woman.
Right.
So I think that's kind of where we are now, in that, there's been this, I think, this loss of butch identity. There's still plenty of femme identity and the sort of lipstick lesbian phenomenon, mm-hmm. but butch identity experiencing a downturn, I honestly believe we'll come out the other side eventually. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to see what the teens bring for the butch femme thing.
I was struggling the other day to find an example of a butch woman in the media, in any form of media. And,
on TV, yeah, Ellen DeGeneres is about as butch as it comes.
Exactly, and that says something. Yeah. But I was going to see if you had any examples, but it doesn't really seem like there are many out there.
Not in mainstream media. Yeah, I mean, it really, and that's about misogyny. Yep. And how far we have actually not come. Mm-hmm. With regard to gender stereotypes, because that's really what it's about.
Yeah.
It's gender. It's not, it doesn't matter whether the woman is a lesbian or not. Mm-hmm. It's about the gender stereotypes. So, yeah, no, I mean, and it's true. There are not butch women in the media.
Well, perhaps that will change eventually.
Eventually.
So did you date a lot when you were younger? Don't mind me asking about that.
Yeah. No, I would say no. I mean, I periodically, but I've had 3 sort of long-term partners. In between those, maybe a little short-term dating. But I was never. I came out when I was in college, and I was with that partner for 3.5 years.
On the computer real quick.
Okay, and you do have a partner now, correct?
Yes, and we've been together 26 years.
Wow. Can you tell me about her a little bit?
Sure. What do you want to know? We've been together 26 years. We have 2 kids.
2 kids? Mm-hmm. Great.
They are 33 and 16.
Boy, girl?
2 girls.
2 girls? Mm-hmm. Great.
We do a lot of activism stuff together.
Oh, that's really cool.
She's the executive director of Bravo.
Nice.
So, we do all of that anti-violence stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that you ask about the butch femme thing, because she is, I don't even know that I could say she identifies as femme. I think she does, at least sometimes. Mm-hmm. But she's relatively butch for a femme. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny because she does a lot of, she used to teach women's studies.
Oh, great.
So she does a lot of presentations and stuff, and people look at her, and she's got relatively short hair, and she looks kind of butch, but she says that it's all relative, because she'll go in and do panels, and people will look at her and think, oh, look, there's the butch lesbian, until I come in. And then suddenly when she's standing next to me, she doesn't look so butch.
That's funny.
Right, so, yeah, that's her picture up there, so you can see, she's actually wears dresses and, cool. But she's got short hair. And it's so funny how people make those, like, okay, short hair butch, it's like, really, there's more to it than that.
Trying to fit it in the box.
Right.
Yeah. Now, how was it for your daughters growing up with 2 moms? Was that...
Well, it's actually an interesting question, because we both do so many panels and so much presenting that the kids always would go with us.
I'm sure they're well informed.
And by the time about Leah, that's the older one, was about 9, Gloria would be doing a panel at like Ohio State or something and say, well, she's right there, why don't you ask her? Because that's often what people were interested in. Well, let's talk about, well, how your kids feel. It's like, well, I don't really know how they feel, but you could ask them. But they're both pretty well adjusted. I don't think it was ever, what Leah would always say on the panels is, well, it's not like I meet a new friend and say, hi, I'm Leah, my mom's a lesbian.
Right. Right.
She didn't immediately come out to everyone she met, but, her close friends, if they were going to be coming to our house, they knew what, we never closeted ourselves. Right. She never expected us to. And she always said, well, if I have a friend who's going to have a problem with it, they're probably not really a good friend. Yeah. So, it really, and, and Kaylin, the younger one, is a junior in high school. They both, interestingly enough, identify as bisexual.
Yeah.
And they both actually have girlfriends right at the moment. Leah actually just broke up with a long-term male partner of 10 years.
Oh, wow.
A little over a year ago, and is currently seeing a woman. And has seen women and men periodically throughout her life. So, and the younger one is 16, a junior in high school, identifying as bisexual, and has a girlfriend at the moment.
Good for her.
And, we know that could change, and quite frankly, as the parent of a 16-year-old, it is just fine. Because there are some, it's frankly less risky.
Yeah.
16-year-olds are going to experiment with sex, and they're not always going to be smart about it.
It's true.
And the potential ramifications,
there you go,
both in terms of STDs and pregnancy, are much less with a girl.
That's very interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I didn't really think about that, honestly, from a parent's point of view.
If you're going to experiment, and they are, a 16-year-old is going to experiment with sex.
Maybe if you presented it that way, more parents would be all right with it. We can hope.
Yeah.
All right. I forgot to ask you, when is your birth date?
August 26th, 1955. Women's Suffrage Day.
Oh, wow. Very special.
Which is how Gloria actually remembers my birthday.
Too funny. Let's see. So you and your partner live together, correct? Great. Does she work here ever, and know anything about cars? Or?
When we first started, she did work some on cars. She does know some about cars, but not anymore.
She's busy with her Bravo position.
Yeah.
Good for her. Can you recall any people in the past, maybe when you were younger, maybe recently, when there was suspicion about any people in the media / news or whatever who were suspected of being maybe LGBT persons, and any sort of controversies that surrounded that? Any forced outings or anything?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I, of course, think everyone is gay until proven otherwise. Gloria teases me about that all the time, because I see lesbians and gay men where there aren't necessarily. Nothing is coming to mind. I think sort of generically that it's very important for people to be out. And it's particularly important for public figures to be out. As role models, I think that's critical. I think it's critical to young people that are trying to come out, that are struggling when they can't see a way for themselves. So I think it's really important. So I certainly advocate that everybody should be out, and that there are very few good reasons not to be. That having been said, I think that it is a process, and that people have to make that choice in their own time. And I didn't have a big coming out crisis. It was about 20 minutes. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
But I know people who have struggled in accepting their own sexual orientation, and a lot of that has to do with how you're raised, and religious beliefs that you're raised in, and your family of origin. And for some people, that is a lifelong struggle.
Oh, yeah.
to overcome that internalized homophobia.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important for us, I realize that I have a great deal of privilege in that I'm out. I don't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not hanging over my head. I don't have to worry about losing my job. I don't have to worry about losing custody of my kids. I don't, But for many people, those things are still very real, and discrimination is still very real. And particularly for people that are in certain jobs, teachers, for example, clergy, it's really risky to come out. And parents, particularly single, divorced parents, where there's another bio parent, and that doesn't, kids get used against each other in lots of ways. But this is yet another way. Well, you give me what I want, or I'm getting custody of it.
Yeah.
And my partner, that happened to.
Oh, that's terrible.
Our older daughter, Gloria, was married to her father. They had separated when Leah was 2.
Yeah.
Gloria and I have been together since Leah was 7. Gloria remarried, and it was a marriage of convenience. Mm-hmm. But because Bruce was saying, that was her ex-husband, because he was saying, I think you're a lesbian and I'm going to take Leah away from you.
Wow. She
remarried and said, no, I'm not. Look, I'm married to a man. And it was and so people do what they have to do, particularly when it comes to our kids. Mm-hmm. And it's less likely, but certainly not unheard of, and it depends on the jurisdiction, that could be a deciding factor in a custody battle. So there's lots of reasons why people aren't out, but I also think that it gets used against us. When you're not out, then you are subject to that sort of pressure. Whether, I don't want to use words like blackmail, because I'm not saying it's necessarily about money, but it's emotional blackmail.
Yeah.
And so, I think being out is the best way to avoid that. Because there's not anybody that anybody could call and tell that it would make a darn bit of difference to me.
Right.
There probably are some people who don't know, but only because they don't know me well enough that it matters.
Right.
Right. So, that's I think it's important for people to be out when they can, to kind of break ground for those who aren't there yet.
Yeah.
But I also, the other side of that coin is the whole concept of outing someone.
Yes.
Particularly with celebrities. It's like, well, so-and-so's going to out. So it happens to politicians even more than celebrities. Mm-hmm. And, culturally, in the LGBT community, that, for so many years was so important that you respected people's need for that closetedness in some cases, and maybe it was about a job, or it was about custody of the kids, or it was about, running for political office, or, and so there were reasons why people made the choices that they did. And so, it was very much, in our community, it was very much a, no, you don't out people.
Yeah.
They will come out when they are ready.
Uh-huh.
And it, on the other hand, when I see closeted people that should be out there being role models, and there's no good reason for them not to be, it's frustrating. I understand the desire to out someone.
Yes.
I don't encourage that or support that, because I do think that is a very personal and individual decision. And I can't know where someone else is in their process. Mm-hmm. And, you can't take that step before you're ready.
All right. So being an activist in the 70s, I'm sure you went to your fair share of protests and rallies. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about maybe a couple of those? Maybe your favorites, maybe most exciting?
Well, one of the things that I think is missing now, and so I guess maybe that makes it part of my favorite, but I very much believe that social movements, in order to be effective, have to really sort of span the whole gamut of activities.
Right.
And that we have to essentially fight on all fronts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, particularly in the 80s, more than the 70s, in the LGBT movement, we saw things like ACT UP, Queer Nation, the Lesbian Avengers, which was kind of that radical fringe.
Okay.
And then at the sort of opposite end of the spectrum, and even now, you have things like HRC, which are pretty assimilationist. And that, we're not any different. And we're not really, but we are.
Mm-hmm.
We have a different culture, and that's okay. It's kind of like that gender thing, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, close, but not quite where we want to be,
Uh-huh.
And so you have, within our movement, you have, very much we're going to play in the mainstream political system. We're going to model kind of, but we're all kind of the beautiful people, and we're all mostly white, definitely all middle class, all gainfully employed, all probably white collar, so there's that whole, and it certainly is not what our community really looks like.
Right.
We have young and old and mentally ill and physically disabled and working class and homeless, and we have, just like the general population, we have a whole range of communities. And I think part of where we are stalled as a movement now is the lack of that radical fringe pushing the movement. Because I think where that's effective is, if we're trying to negotiate, for example, a piece of legislation, whether it's at the federal level or the city level or the state level or whatever, when you've got the radical fairies outside protesting, it makes me look pretty moderate, and gee, maybe we should sit down and talk to Chris, So I think that, we've kind of lost some of that, and I think that it weakens our movement. I think we need that fringe. We also need the other side of the spectrum. I mean, I don't think everybody should be in the middle. I think we need that sort of more conservative, traditional, assimilationist kind of, it's just like everybody else. And we need both.
Right.
And we need, everything in the middle. And I worry sometimes that we as a movement kind of chop people off and marginalize people at the both ends of those extremes. I mean, taking, gay Republicans versus, the radical youth.
Very interesting.
People. So I think that that's where we lose some of our effectiveness.
So with political activism, inevitably there's going to be some sort of police involvement in some cases. Have you ever experienced anything like that? Witnessed or been part of or known someone who's been arrested or mistreated?
Well, our community's relationship with the police is complex. Not just in within the concept of, like, protests. I mean, I've certainly seen more violent response to protests from the police in things like anti-war stuff. I remember when Leah was about 13 or 14, it must have been the first Gulf War. And there was a big, it was when Daddy Bush bombed, whatever, that first Gulf War. And there was a big anti-war protest on campus. And we were going. And we were taking Leah with us. And I think she was 13 or 14. She was a young teen. And so, so we talked to her, and, Gloria and I are both old enough to remember war protests in the 60s for Vietnam, where it was resulted in things like Kent State.
Right.
So we talked to her and we said, okay, first of all, there's some rules about going to an anti-war protest. Number one, you got to have a bandana in case there's tear gas. Make sure you have an ID. Make sure you know multiple phones, because that was well before cell phones. So make sure you know not only our phone numbers, but we're here too. So who would you call if you got separated from us and got arrested? Make sure you got some phone numbers. make sure you have some money in your pocket, make sure you're not carrying any illegal substances. Yeah. And it was, and then we laughed and we looked at her and said, some moms teach their kids about makeup. Their daughters about makeup. So, so really that was much, but that wasn't so much about or about an LGBT, like civil rights protest kind of thing, although we certainly went to those as well. With that, the rule was much more about the media than it was the police, because the police were likely not to even be there.
Okay. Because
we weren't ever really, really big, unless you started to talk about things like gay pride or something like that. But, but not getting in front of the camera.
Okay.
And not getting, because it was much more likely that, the TV cameras were there and you didn't want to get. In fact, I remember the first gay pride, Gloria went to every time I went by a camera. She would hold a balloon in front of her face just in case, because you didn't want to suddenly appear on the Channel 4 news coverage of gay pride if you weren't out.
Right.
And she was worried that Leah's dad might see it. So that was much more my experience than actual. Now, on the other hand, though, we could talk about the police in other ways. They used to do a lot of, and still do in ways, targeting of our community. The police very much view the LGBT people as either crime victim or perpetrator, and really nothing in between.
Interesting.
Which is often true with marginalized communities. But they're either looking at us as the victim of a hate crime, or somehow we are. Whether it's drugs or, cruising for sex kind of, public indecency stuff, or child molester, or, they're always looking for some criminal angle, and that hasn't changed a whole lot. It's better in Columbus than it is in many other communities, and that's in large part because of what Bravo's done over the years, but certainly our relationship with the police in general, our movement really was founded on the Stonewall riots, which was a response to police raiding our bars. Historically, that has gone on forever. The police come in and raid the gay bars. And it was more like entertainment than anything else.
Terrible. Did you ever experience that?
I did not. I was never in a bar raid, although, there were some bar raids here in Columbus about 10 or 11 years ago that were ostensibly drug raids. And yet, none of the bars that they raided, did they find anybody with any drugs. It was like a Wednesday evening during the Dark League. And so they raided like these sort of neighborhood kind of bars. It wasn't like, now, had they gone into some of the big dance clubs on a Saturday night, I have no doubt they would have scored some drugs. But that's not what they were doing. They were doing the neighborhood bars on a Wednesday evening during the Dark League. And I maintain to this day that they were practice raids and they were training their SWAT teams.
Could very well be.
They never would admit that.
Right.
But, you gotta, I couldn't think of a much safer way to practice a raid than a bunch of middle-aged white gay men playing darts. You know what? They're not going to be armed. They're not going to fight back.
Right.
And they didn't have any drugs.
Right.
I think they got one person who had one joint in their pocket. That was the sum total of, and they raided 4 bars at the same time.
Wow.
So I've always maintained it was a training.
Perhaps something fishy.
Because I actually don't think it was just plain harassment either. I really do think it was a training situation. But
Interesting.
But the fact that would be the choice. Oh, well, let's go raid a gay bar.
No one will say anything.
No one will do anything.
Yeah. Huh. Well, speaking of bars, can you tell me a little bit about your social life now? Social clubs, restaurants, drag shows. What does that consist of?
Me personally, or for the community?
For you.
I mean, I certainly socialize within the LGBT community. A lot of times I'm socializing outside that community as well. I have plenty of, straight friends. We have kids,
Right.
one of whom is still in high school. So,
Right.
All of those typical, kid things.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the zoo and we did all those kinds of, we like the same restaurants everybody else likes. I mean, we definitely, and because of Bravo and our need to do outreach in the community, we certainly spend plenty of time in the gay bars as well. We actually have really good friends that are drag queens. So we actually spend a fair amount of time going to drag shows, mostly because we're friends with all the queens.
Fun, yeah.
Cool. But, yeah, we do all that stuff.
Okay, well, we've talked a little bit about some of the unfairness that exists in the community. Can you remember any specific times where there was kindness, maybe someone reaching out and like helping you or making an effort to understand that really stuck with you?
Wow, that's a good question, because I thought you were going to ask me to tell you, and I could certainly tell you the other side of that question, but I think, I can't think of a specific incident, but it's just kind of a general, it goes with that being out. I mean, I assume it's going to be okay, and usually it is. And that's a really, I guess, no, I know what it would be. It would probably be around Kaylin as a small child.
Okay.
Because, particularly grade school and younger. And I can think of the day she was born, and even an earlier one. The people at the nurses at the hospital just did not even bat an eye. That it was two women, and we had another couple friend of ours with us, and it was clearly the lesbian birth,
Yeah.
And they didn't bat an eye. They were just professional, and at one point, kind of after it was all over, I made some comment to the one woman, and she said, "You would not believe the number of moms that come in here. They don't want to be pregnant. They're on drugs. They don't care about their kid, and it's obvious to us that you are." You wanted this kid, you planned for this kid, you are bringing her into this world, and she is loved.
That's great.
And that's what's most important. So that really stuck with me. And I'd had that same experience, particularly around being a mom, with teachers, with parents of other kids. Wow. I've had teachers, and even earlier, when Leah was in second grade, so that would have been, gosh. I used to do a lot of chaperoning for field trips because because I had my own business, I had more flexibility in my schedule.
Interesting.
Than many people do.
Yeah.
And so I could, take an afternoon and go with the kids to the whatever.
Fun.
And the teachers would say, we are just so grateful to have involved parents that want to be there.
Great.
And that has always been my experience with the schools.
That is really great.
With parents, with teachers, with principals. They are most interested in the fact that, you are an involved parent, you care, and it really was, all through both kids, been a non-issue.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Good to hear some positives.
Yeah.
Now, are there any important differences that you'd like to address between the gay community and the lesbian community? Like, do they have more benefits? Are they more accepted, or is it vice versa? How do you feel about that situation?
I think Columbus is somewhat fortunate. I was going to say unique, but I think fortunate is a better choice. In that those two communities, the lesbian community and the gay male community, work much more closely together here than in many cities. Now, in smaller, I mean, it's interesting because like when I lived in Wheeling, West Virginia, there was one community. And, because there was one bar and there was,
Wow.
it was a relatively small group of people, and there was no lesbian community versus the men, kind of. It was very much we're all in this together. We live in a small town that is not, And so you come into the bigger cities like Columbus or other big cities, and there's so much more available. There's more groups, there's more bars, there's more people to be friends with, so there does tend to be kind of a natural separation. But a bunch of us worked really hard over the years to make sure that didn't happen here. And so really Columbus's LGBT community much more close-knit than, for example, Chicago or, other communities where it's very much, the men's stuff goes on over here and the women's stuff goes on over here. But I think it takes effort to build those bridges and to really focus in on that. And so I think we're fortunate in that regard.
That's cool.
Here. I'd like to think I've had some hand in that. I can't take total responsibility, but I do think it's there's a lot less of the sort of separation than there is in many communities.
Is religion important in your life? I kind of have the same
question.
So
there are so many ways to answer that question.
However
yes,
you would like to.
And no.
Okay.
And it's a complex answer. Yes, in that, I grew up in a church. I was raised Episcopalian. My mother is still very active in the Episcopal Church, and very much on the progressive side of that whole, she's leading the way when it comes to gay bishops. She's all about the gay bishops. So it certainly was important in my formative years, more so the sense of community than the religion side of things. For many years, and then of course, I don't think you can be LGBT in this culture and not have some sort of, need for self-preservation around religion and the intolerance that, religion has been used as a club against our community for many, many, many years and continues to be. And so it's important in that regard. Gloria and I made a conscious choice several years ago to join the Unitarian Church, UU Church, in part because of Kaylin, and we wanted her to be able to grow up with that community sense. That kids in the gay community is a whole different subject.
Right.
Because there aren't so many of them. More than there used to be, but it's still not really a community that is, like, not to say that kids aren't welcome at some events, because certainly they are, but it's not kid-focused.
Yes, I understand.
And so we wanted her to have that kind of community in terms of church, less about, again, the religion than about the community and the spirituality.
Right.
And so we made a conscious choice to seek that out in the Unitarian Universalist Church is about as non-dogmatic as you can get. In fact, it is specifically non-dogmatic. So that's been an important part of our family. For me personally, spirituality, I do perceive myself as a spiritual person, not the same as a religious person. And I actually identify as a pagan, as a witch, very much from that, again, 70s feminist sort of women's spirituality kind of movement. So for my personal belief, that's also very important, and it's very much how I form my worldview. So it is, I guess, important in all of those ways, but but not in the ways that most people think of when you ask that question.
Right. Okay, getting towards the end.
Okay.
What are you most proud of?
Gosh, I'm proud of a lot of things. I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of my business. I'm proud of Bravo and, the years that the impact that my activism has had on this community. I'm proud of a lot of things. But probably if I had to pick one, I would guess it would have to be the business.
Great.
And I take the alternative part of alternative auto care pretty seriously.
Very nice. All right, and what do you think is one of the most important moments in Columbus GLBT history?
The election of Mary Jo Hudson to City Council. Not her appointment,
Okay.
but when she actually won the election.
And year? Do you remember?
No, it wasn't all that long ago.
Right.
2004, 3,
Okay.
It was a municipal election. 2003, 2004, somewhere along there.
Why do you perceive that as the most important?
Well, and as I said, there are others,
Right.
any number of times when we've passed various laws and, the first time the mayor came to a gay event and all of those things but to actually, we've had a number of unsuccessful out LGBT, mostly G, candidates run, but it was the first time anyone ever won.
Very interesting.
And to win political office citywide
Yep.
as an out lesbian was huge.